All right, today we have a little bit of a different angle when it comes to our podcast and what we're going to be discussing. And I feel it's like a little bit more formal than what we do, but it's a really good product, good topic that I think that the audience and the listeners are going to get a lot out of. And joining me today, I have Tanya Steinbeck, who is the CEO of UDIA WA. So welcome, Tanya. Thank you for joining.
Oh, thanks very much for having me, Ash.
Now, I have a list of questions that I want to talk about, but ultimately, in a nutshell, I think there's an importance for both property managers and investors when you are either working in the industry or you are buying in the market to have a really good understanding of what's happening on a bigger level. So that's what we're talking about, and I think that it's I guess we get so focused on our such transactional, day-to-day workload, we're not necessarily looking at the future and what problems could arise, and also thinking about, is there something that we can start being mindful of now and thinking of now so that we can create a good future for the housing industry as a whole. So I think that we do need to take a lot more focus in it. It's interesting because I go to a few of your events, which are fantastic. And it always surprises me that it doesn't feel, and I don't know what the audience is like at those, but I don't see any fellow property manager friends.
Yeah, look, actually a really, really good point. We are actually just looking at our membership strategy at the moment to see how we can better engage with the real estate sector just more broadly, both from a sales side and the property management side. And I think historically it speaks to UDIA back in the 70s. It was formed by a bunch of land developers. And so historically, UDIA was created to represent land and land developers. And particularly over the last sort of six or so years, it's been a deliberate move into representing all forms of housing development across the continuum, and in particular apartments and strata developments and things like that. So yeah, the role of I guess the real estate sector is one that's incredibly important to our members, and one that we're hoping to to grow over the next few years.
Excellent. Yeah, I've always taken a lot of value coming back from them. So they've been great events to be at. Out of curiosity, is there a UDIA set up for each state?
Yes, yeah, there is. So UDIA, we're a federated model, much like the way our government operates. So we have a separate organisation in each state and territory, with the exception of Tasmania. And we have a national body which represents our interests on the federal issues with the federal government, that we all sort of feed into and provide advice to, and we fund that national body at a state level. So
Amazing.
yeah, so we're everywhere except Tassie.
Yeah, poor Tassie. I mean,
Poor Tassie, we've got to build Tassie into the picture. It's
it's
on the agenda.
it's such a beautiful part of Australia as well. But yeah, they always get forgotten. So let's start off with a few questions that I've got for you. So there's been a lot of discussion about social and affordable housing. What role do developers and industry bodies like UDIA play in addressing the need, and without sort of putting too many questions through, and what more can be done to support sort of affordable housing projects, because it's such a hot topic at the moment, affordability.
Yeah, well, look, I first of all, I think it's fantastic that this conversation has been elevated to the degree it has by all levels of government, and the fact that our forthcoming federal election and state elections have housing as a top priority is refreshing, and not something that we've had for quite some time. I think in terms of the development sector, the reality is the private sector delivers, well, in WA at least 96% of all of our housing supply, and it'd be probably, 94% at a federal level. And so the private sector has a massive role to play in making sure that we have sufficient housing supply. And I guess the importance of recognising adequate supply in controlling price growth, escalation, and making sure that we have sufficient stock that is affordable to those that are on low to moderate incomes. So we've seen a significant investment in social housing, which is very much welcome, particularly by this current WA or outgoing WA government, and at a federal level with the Housing Australia Future Fund. And so the opportunity, I guess, for the private sector and developers is to partner with community housing organisations who are the ones that would be managing much of the social housing in particular, or social and community housing in these new projects, to bring forward projects that address that need and leverage the federal funding that is on offer. So that's sort of the one side of it with the federal funding commitment. I think the other opportunity moving forward too is really to leverage Key Start. We're very lucky here in WA to have had Key Start for a very long time, which is essentially the state government's lending arm for housing for those that are on sort of more low to moderate incomes. So what's happening with Key Start in the next 6 months? On the 1st of July, they're going to become a government trading enterprise, or a GTE. What that means for purchasers and for developers is that the role of Key Start will be expanded. So instead of just providing finance direct to the consumer, they can also finance projects, and that's not something that they can do under their current legislation under which they're established. So we've been talking with the state government and Key Start around what's the role that Key Start can play moving forward in helping to, I guess, reduce the cost of capital, upfront capital for the private sector to be able to get some of these projects, particularly apartment projects, over the line to become feasible and get them out of the ground. What does that look like? And is there an opportunity where Key Start could potentially take a proportion of a pre-sales commitment for apartment projects for shared equity loans, or other forms of low deposit home loans? Allocation to those consumers that need more support to get their foot in the door, I guess, into owning their own home. So there's quite a lot. There's also the prospect of what we call inclusionary zoning, which is basically a mandated percentage in every new project of social and affordable housing that meets a certain eligibility criteria. That is something that we've been liaising with the government on over the last probably 12 months. It's established in other countries and to a degree in some other states, but as an industry, we always prefer, I guess, the carrot versus the stick approach on those things. If there is an incentive for developers, whether that's through increased plot ratio or height on a building, that compensates for them having to give up part of their stock for social, then that's a much better approach in our view than mandating it, where feasibility for apartment projects at the moment are borderline, if working at all.
Yeah. So we're seeing that on the ground, that there are massive levels of people coming through home opens for the 2-bedroom units and the 2x1s and 1-bedrooms. Really interesting that sometimes the prices are driven up so much for these little 1-bedroom and 2-bedrooms. I sometimes question and go, why wouldn't you go get a house? Like, you can get a house for the same price, but it's not what people are wanting. People are wanting the lock up and leave, the lower maintenance, sometimes the security of that unit. It suits a lot of people. It suits the people coming into Perth, the students, a lot of single people, and it's such a big picture, isn't it? We've gone down such a big road where we're no longer a double income society. We're single income. I mean, you could go. I was looking at a post the other day, and there was a lady that was having a baby on her own. So because she decided she was having a baby on her own, absolutely, fantastic, idea. But that's the mentality that we've got, and we don't have the houses. And equally, I don't necessarily want a single person to be occupying a 4x2 either, when it could service more. But the fact that we're getting such massive home opens for those little units really shows that there's such a demand for that. Have you noticed any difference since we've had the rules change around granny flats a little bit more, with people being able to add on that granny flat and sort of having extra housing? Have you noticed a big impact with that or not yet?
Oh, look, nothing that's moving the dial.
No, I agree.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, there might be a few more people that might consider doing that otherwise wouldn't have. But as you were just saying, I mean, one of the other key drivers as to why we're in this mess that we're in now is that we have so WA's housing stock is 80% 3-bedroom or more. So it's a vast majority for 4 or 5 bedroom stock, that over 80. So very little of our housing stock at the moment historically has been 1 and 2 bedrooms, which is why you're starting to see this huge demand, because we've not kept up with that demographic shift that's happened over time. And we're very attached to our 4x2, house and land package with a backyard and a pool and all of that sort of thing. The reality is, particularly since post COVID, there's far more single person households or 2-person households than there've ever been before, and our reduction in birth rate and things like that. People aren't having families like they used to. So the 1 and 2 bedroom issue is a real one, and it's very difficult to fix quickly. So the one of the other factors that we're dealing with is a huge percentage of under occupation in our housing stock, as you were saying before. So we've got one person living in a 4-bedroom house, completely inefficient use of our housing stock, but they have no choice because there just isn't the volume of 1 and 2 bedroom stock in the market. So that is where we need to be focusing. That's what the social and affordable housing product needs to be, predominantly, and so that we can start to sort of balance out the volume of stock for the smaller households.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's why I just wrote in my notes, that the more we can increase that stock level is the minute that those prices can come down to a bit more of a realistic price point as well. I mean, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but we're very late to the party to try and solve this. It's like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
one of those things where we need it now, and this isn't going to be resolved for a long time. It's, even I think it's all fine to say, that, the government's going to, you have more sort of social housing and build this and all of that. But the truth is, we still have to have the labor to do it. We still have to have the materials. You still have to have the logistics to even do it. It's fine to say that's what our intention is, but how are people going to do it so quickly? Like, what's the forecast like from your end? Is this a realistically a 5-year, 10-year, 20 ongoing?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. And you're absolutely right. It's not going to be fixed overnight because we've had decades of underinvestment in housing at all levels of government. So we've really dropped the ball. And I think one of the key things that we've been pushing from an advocacy perspective for years is integrating our migration settings and population forecasting with housing and infrastructure policy at a federal level, and then driving that down to the states. That's not happened. They've been done in complete isolation, which is why we've seen the crisis that we're in now, because of unprecedented population growth post-COVID, completely unanticipated, completely uncontrolled. And then, we wonder why we've run out of housing and we don't have the sufficient infrastructure and things like that. So we've recently released a product called the National Housing Pipeline, which is effectively a forward projection of development ready or housing ready supply across the country. And so we've looked at that in the context of the federal government's lofty ambition of 1.2 million homes over the next 5 years. And our percentage of that in WA means that we need to be delivering 25,000 new dwellings a year over the next 5 years. And at the moment, we are probably at about 16 or 17. That's up from what it was, which was about 14,000 dwelling commencements, super low. The challenge, so we're forecasting that we've probably got 6 years of supply left in terms of land supply, and that's undeveloped currently urban zone land, assuming that we develop 20 dwellings a hectare. That's not a lot, right? And that's assuming that we do 25, that we get to 25,000 a year. So what's going to change, I guess, over the next 5 to 10 years? From a greenfields development or house and new house land product perspective, the biggest issues we have is lack of infrastructure. So water, power, sewer, basic utility infrastructure is not there. It's not been planned for. It's not been funded. It's not been prioritised. And all the easy land's gone. In Perth Metro, all the easy land's gone. It's fragmented. It's constrained. It's got issues. So it's going to take longer to convert that into developable supply. So there's the infrastructure piece, and then there's the environmental overlay. The environmental approvals process is very cumbersome, which to their credit, the government's recognised and is undertaking some streamlining processes, hopefully make that easier. But it's incredibly difficult to quickly deliver in great volumes land supply given these constraints at the moment. So that's our focus. We've got a $400 million funding commitment, bipartisan, from the Liberal Party and the Labor Party for exactly that type of infrastructure, which is fantastic. That's a start. Not going to happen overnight. So, in the next, we're going to continue to see supply pressures at least over the next 2 years until we start to see some of that infrastructure come into play and some of those environmental issues to be resolved. And in a built form environment, so apartments and, the higher density product, we're starting to see green shoots there, which haven't been there for quite some time. So construction costs, which are a major driver of why we're not seeing apartment projects go up across the country, not just here, has stabilised, but it's not going backwards. So construction cost escalation has been so significant that it has made the vast majority of apartment projects unviable, unless you have that high underlying land value in areas like the western suburbs around the river, things like that, right? They work and we're seeing those. But the other ones where we really need that affordable supply, particularly the 1 and 2 bedroom stock, they're still not feasible, not without government subsidy. So either unit prices need to increase, which is counterintuitive, to the price, to the point where it then covers cost, or the government needs to subsidise it, because at the moment there's just we've seen an uptick in multi-unit approvals in the December quarter. That's positive, but it's not approvals that matter, it's commencements and completions, and that's where we're not yet seeing the uptick. So we've really got to watch that quite carefully over the next 12 months to make sure that those approvals actually translate into construction commencements, which is a major issue. And we just don't have the construction sector capacity in Perth, in the tier 1, which is, your multiplexes and the large apartment project builders. We just don't have enough. We don't have enough capacity to produce what we need, which is another challenge.
Yeah, so if I can put it sort of into some simple terms, we've got the land supply, which is something we've got to take into account, but we're struggling with, the power, the water, and that type of infrastructure there, but we're sort of limited a little bit with access to that that land, even though it feels like we have quite a lot of land that is limited there. So then that should maybe still be considered as a long-term plan, which it is, because we still need it eventually, but that's not going to be happening straight away. It's a long-term vision. And then while we're waiting for that long-term vision, we focus on, okay, well, what can we do, you know, with high rises and extra dwellings and all of that? Is that sort of, as a real basic term, sort of summary of what we're looking at?
Yeah, I think so. I think, the reality is that house and land packages, as much, there's a lot of criticism about urban sprawl and that we shouldn't be developing in greenfields areas and all that sort of stuff. And I get that because the cost to service it from an infrastructure perspective, is significant, but also heavily subsidised by developers, which I think a lot of people forget. So developers do fund a lot of infrastructure in these projects. The state doesn't fund all of it. But the reality is, if you want housing quickly, greenfields is where it can be produced the fastest because your construction time for a volume builder like ABN Group, is nine to 12 months at the most for a typical 4x2 single dwelling.
Yeah.
But you're looking at 2 to 3 years for an apartment project. And that's from like putting the shovel in the ground. So we just don't, that's why I sort of think that over the next 2 years, we're still going to be in for a tough time in terms of supply, because it's going to take at least a couple of years for these apartment projects, when they are viable, to actually hit the ground and be housing people. Greenfields can do it a lot faster, but they can only do it if they have access to power, water, sewer. If we don't have that, then not going to happen.
Can I ask a little bit of a cheeky question about sort of the new builds and the fact that investors and a lot of sort of eastern state, investors are buying these up. I guess I hear reports on social media that, we should be leaving them for our first home buyers and all of that. But from my point of view, I'm just not seeing first home buyers necessarily wanting to buy homes. They just seem like such a transient generation these days. They don't seem to be locked into something. So as much as I see on the ground people saying, oh, well, we're not given the opportunity, I actually question whether you would if you could anyway. And, are there ever any discussions or something that you guys see that's a little bit different on your end?
Yeah, look, it's a really good point. So I would say up until probably 6 or 9 months ago, from a house and land perspective, investors were highly active and would be, at least probably 50% of sales, right, across the sector. That's flipped. So investors are now on the downward trajectory and first home buyers are making a comeback. And there's a couple of reasons for that, I think. So the first of all, I probably my response to don't let the investors in is we have a rental vacancy rate of sub 2%. That's not enough. And rents are, as property managers are listening, what's going on there. We need the investors. That's the only way we're going to start increasing the volume of rental stock. So we can't not say investors are bad, because the way that our system is structured, that's how we get rental supply. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is changing. And one of the reasons I think first home buyers have been largely left out, particularly in WA, is that a lot of first home buyer product is financed through Keystart or through the federal government's first homeowner guarantee scheme. So what we saw was Keystart not keeping up with the shift in market conditions and particularly the increase in the median house price. So their property price caps were way too low. There was hardly any stock on the market for a first home buyer to choose from if they wanted to go through Keystart. So that option was out. So we saw a huge influx of people taking on the first homeowner guarantee scheme at the federal level because the eligibility criteria was far more attractive and the property price cap was higher. That's now changed. So at the end of last year, the government recognised that was a handbrake on first home buyers getting into the market. So they've now changed their criteria, and now it actually reflects the median house price. So I'm just make sure I tell you the right number. So now we've actually got a $750,000 price cap for the first home buyer grant in WA, which is far more realistic and opens up a lot more opportunities. And then, oh, sorry, that was for the first home buyers grant through the government, which is the 10 grand that you get if you're a first home buyer. In terms of Key Start's purchase price, they have increased it to 730,000 for their low deposit product, which is far more realistic, I think, given what first home buyers have to choose from. Because at the moment in the last quarter, if you were looking to buy a new house and land package, for example, you're looking at $775,000. That's the median house and land package price, which is a significant increase.
A lot, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lot. And because I think we don't have much established stock on the market, we've only got 4,500 odd or close to 5,000 properties, and we need 10. There's just not that choice out there. And first home buyers have been kind of wedged in between, like where do they go? Because they can't get finance for a house and land package. They can't get an established house. Rents are too high. So I think that's constrained the market. But now we've seen these sort of settings shift to accommodate where the market's at. We're starting to see first home buyers come back. And I think the role of shared equity, or which is what we call it here, but the Help to Buy scheme federally, which will come into play, where the federal government takes an equity share of 30 or 40% in a home. And so the home buyer only has to pay a mortgage on their 60% rather than 100%. And then over time, as their circumstances change or equity grows in the home, they can pay it back or move to a traditional lender. So that has not been prioritised here historically, but it's going to have to be because of the median house price being what it is. It's just people are otherwise shut out of the market.
There's I love the psychological side of this, and the first thing that I've just written down 2 words, and they are fussy and impatient. And I'm referring to first home buyers. I know you mentioned that there's not a lot of established stock, but people are fussy these days. Younger people are, and they're also impatient. They don't want to wait for that new build. And I feel like there's like such a big psychological part of understanding the next generation, so that those plans can be made for their needs as we go on. Like it's just a can of worms, isn't it?
Yeah, look, it's really interesting, and I think that's where we're going to see things like build to rent really come into play, where if the new generation, in fact, don't want to be tied down to a mortgage, then build to rent is a fantastic option, right? You still get all the amenity and the security of tenure that you don't necessarily have in a sort of, if you're renting off a mum and dad investor. That's a product that I think will become increasingly popular over time. It's huge internationally. We're just a bit late to the party in Australia as usual, but at the moment though, build to rent is still seen as quite a premium product. So from an affordability perspective, it's not quite there yet. But if we start to get the volume of build to rent product that we should have here, that's a really good option, I think, for people that don't want the mortgage and they want the flexibility to be able to change locations or travel or move for work or whatever it is. I think we're going to see more of that to accommodate, exactly as you say, that sort of sense of impatience and not wanting to be tied down.
Yeah. Can we finish off by just having a little bit of a talk about sustainability and the considerations that you guys are taking into account and that you're seeing with developers, with not only products and material to get these builds done quicker, but also that whole sustainability from an environmental point of view, what sort of, well, let's just actually, so there's two questions in there, I've confused it. The first one just being, are you seeing a trend in new products being brought to the industry to help builds happen quickly? Is there been much movement there?
Yeah, absolutely. So UDIA did a research project with Ernst and Young 6 years ago now, talking about the benefits of modern methods of construction, and particularly frame construction, versus the traditional brick and tile, which we love here in WA. And at that time, 6 years ago, I guess the numbers were it was basically cost. It was a cost. Extra cost to do the frame sort of construction, not by a lot, but enough to sort of, I guess, not entice builders to look at doing things differently, right? Because it was just easier and cheaper to do brick because our supply chain wasn't there and we didn't have the trade base that was educated in how to construct homes made out of frame. So that's changed significantly out of necessity because of the housing crisis that we're in. So now all of a sudden it's speed to market. Like it's always speed to market, but now it's really important that we get this stuff on the ground fast. So we are seeing like most of the volume builders now will build out of frame, particularly on the second story, two-story homes. We're also seeing off-site construction and modular prefabricated homes now being delivered, which weren't there 6 years ago. And that significantly speeds up time. We're looking at sort of 12-week turnaround, rather than 12 months, right? So it's a substantial reduction in time.
And they're nice.
Sorry, and they're
They're nice.
they are.
Yeah.
And the advantages with that, I guess, is that particularly with automation, and this is the role I think that's coming of AI and technology, in that you can get millimeter precision in terms of when you produce things like that. Whereas when you do a brick and tile, it's up to the bricky, it's up to the chippy, it's up to, everybody, there's too many moving parts and different people involved, which means the quality sometimes isn't there. So there's a lot of advantages to that, and we are seeing it. The challenge is that in an immature market like we've got here for that sort of construction, we have to get the volume, like we had commitment to volume to then get these businesses to be sustainable moving forward. The government's assisting with that with sort of mandating modern methods of construction for social housing, for new social housing. So they're supporting it and they're putting skin in the game to help get the volume up. So that's definitely, we're already seeing it now, but it just needs to be seen on a larger scale, which I think will come in time. And on the sustainability front, the challenge that we had so the National Construction Code mandates the minimum requirements on a lot of sustainability measures, especially energy efficiency and accessibility. And so when the code changes were proposed to hit here, it was during the hardest possible construction environment that we've seen in decades, where we had the building bonus, the pain of the building bonus, a lot of builders going broke, very difficult operating environment. So the government agreed to defer the implementation of the energy efficiency and accessibility requirements. The energy efficiency ones will come into play this year in April. So that will increase, I guess, the minimum standards for energy efficiency in new builds. Accessibility is still a little bit further off, but for social and affordable social housing in particular, they are already doing the platinum sort of standard of accessibility. And then we also saw the introduction of the medium density code as part of planning reform last year, which takes a much more stringent approach to sustainability, energy efficiency, and tree canopy. So I think the other thing that we're seeing now is the impacts of lack of tree canopy across many urban areas, and Perth's no different. And then the impact of the polyphagous shot borer that's decimating our tree canopy across the city. That we are now having to focus a great deal on how we increase our tree canopy so that we avoid that heat island effect, and particularly when we look at things like climate change. And the last few weeks in Perth has given us a bit of a taste of what a week of 40 degrees looks like. So we need to be able to adapt to that, and anticipate that in how we build our communities.
Yeah, fabulous. I think that these conversations are just so important to continue having, and for people to be mindful, just even things simply as, what you're talking about with the materials being used and how these companies need to have a higher volume to be sustainable, and all of those conversations just need to be had a little bit more, directly with real estate industry, but directly also with those investors as well. And what I would also love to see, and I've got some things planned, some podcasts planned with, that more green efficiency in investment properties. I find in WA, we don't seem to have that at the forefront of investment properties. And I love the idea of investment properties sort of having a bit more of a energy efficiency tick, which I think will come in, but we just don't really have it now. I think some other states do. So for me, that's something that I am thinking about in the future, that's going to be relevant for us property managers. So what can we start doing now so that we can start warming up to what should a good investment property have inside the home, to start ticking these boxes before, and not doing things when you have to do it. You know what I mean? How about just
Yes.
doing things because it's the right thing to do as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, when we always prefer the carrot than the stick, as we said.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think we talk about housing affordability most often in the context of how much it costs to buy a house, but we don't think about, how much it costs to live in the house when you've
Yeah.
bought it. And that is where sustainability really comes in. And it's those energy costs, ongoing maintenance, running costs to heat and cool your home, things like that. Like that's the true, I guess, affordability conversation. It's affordable living, not affordable housing. That's one part, but then you got to be able to afford to pay the bills, right? And we've seen that with, power credits and things like that, because our housing stock has not kept up with, the requirements of a changing climate.
It's interesting, isn't it? So when, tenants move into a property, they don't know those costs and the history of costs for the property. I've actually did a podcast a few weeks ago, and it was, and I can't remember, I don't want to say the name wrong. I think they were called Where's the Door? Where's the Door? And it's a link now that I have on my email signature, because people can access, the financial planning and all of that. It's not means tested, so anyone can access that. But they also had a program where you can have someone come out to your house, and they can go through and check the efficiency of your items as well as the home items, to see, are there any areas that you could save money, or, or potentially improve, to have that best energy efficiency. And I don't think many people know that there are some platforms around where you can actually have access to that. So for me, I love to showcase those things. And the other thing, I don't know whether you know much about sort of what I do, but I just want to share it because I try to spread the word as much as possible. But we as an office have a philanthropic portfolio. And so we are always attracting those owners or those investors who don't feel comfortable actually, renting out their home for what the market rate is, for various reasons. Sometimes it's just something that doesn't sit well with them. Sometimes, they're a lot of more of the older generation. Sometimes they don't have a mortgage. Sometimes they've moved into a nursing home. They've inherited property, lots of different reasons. Sometimes they just have a philanthropic, mindset. So what happens is those owners come to us, and they offer the property for about 30% under that market rate. And generally the property sits between 400 and 500 a week, which we found is the perfect affordability for a single family. So we do work closely with Rana House and their housing project, but what it's doing is it's allowing allowing those families that maybe don't have access to the social housing to still be matched with a client that has that philanthropy heart, who is happy to rent out their home for that 400, 450 per week. So it's the little thing, I guess, that real estate agents can do now to help, and it's a small impact, but we can all sort of play a little bit of a part in that. And I think that making sure that investors know that there is an opportunity, if they wish, they don't have to, but if they are able to, then it's going to help some families. And like, I think for us, we might help 20 families a year with that. It's not going to save the world, but if everyone can just have a little bit of responsibility of what they can physically do it, and same with what we've talked about today, there's lots of moving parts and it's such a long-term ongoing plan. But if we can all as a community take these little steps, just to get us past those 2 years or 5 years, we sort of have to work together, don't we?
Oh, look, 100%. I think what you're doing there with your clients is amazing and really timely, given NRAS, the National Rental Affordability Scheme, that's running out now. Like, this year will be the end of it, which is a real shame. There was some issues with it, but it ultimately delivered what exactly you're now doing proactively, which is fantastic. And we're certainly been pushing our state government here, in the absence of federal government leadership on it, to take it over, so that there continues to be some form of affordable rental scheme in place for investors, so that we do provide choice, particularly at that sort of 20%, 30% below market. So fantastic initiative. I think it's great, and hopefully the government might recognise the value in it moving forward, and we continue to see that roll out for years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. So wonderful chatting with you and taking your time to do today. I think the higher level conversations, I think, are just really, really important for investors and for property managers and those in real estate to understand. Look at the bigger picture with what's going on and understand the bigger picture. So it's such a common, it's a common question we get from our investors all the time. They're always seeking our advice on what's happening here and what's happening there. So being able to understand that is really great. And I appreciate your time so much. So thank you for joining me today and helping us all sort of understand and navigate that future of housing as well.
No worries. Very welcome. Great to be with you, Ash.